origins of the Vietnamese people go back to the dawn of time and are shrouded in mystery and legend. No doubt the people of the north came from China and those in the south from India. Thus, the origins of the name Indochina, which the French used to describe the area of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia combined. One of the longest and thinnest countries in the world, Vietnam stretches for over 1,000 miles along the South China Sea. It is only 31 miles wide at its narrowest point. 3/4 of the country is mountainous. The northern highlands form a natural barrier with China. To the west, Vietnam is separated from neighboring Laos and Cambodia by the 800-mile Annamite chain. In the middle of the country, the central highlands plunge directly into the South China Sea. At times, this has made communications between north and south difficult and travel treacherous. At either end of the country, river deltas provide rich farmland. In the north, the Red River Delta extends 180 miles inland. In the south, the mighty Mekong River ends its journey fanning out across the southern tip of Vietnam. The alluvial soils of both rivers offer ideal conditions for rice cultivation. This country has been called Champa, Funan, Annam, Tonkin, Cochin, and Nam Viet. It has been conquered and divided, reconquered, absorbed, divided and unified, and it has always thrown off its occupiers and invaders. China, a country 40 times its size, had advanced upon and occupied Vietnam innumerable times 500 years before Columbus set sail for the New World. Every invasion was eventually repulsed. The Red River Delta, with its capital Hanoi, has historically been the cultural heart of Vietnam. Many travelers will begin their journey in the south, in Saigon. Those from the south still call it Saigon. Those from the north usually call it by its new name, Ho Chi Minh City. Cars are just beginning to make an appearance in greater numbers on the streets of Saigon. The vast majority of people get around on motor scooters and bicycles. At rush hour, the traffic has to be experienced to be believed. Motorbikes move in great swarms along the street like huge schools of fish or insects, darting in and out of traffic with great speed and precision. One wonders what the roads would look like when all of these people were wealthy enough to buy their own car. Saigon is a city of beautiful French architecture, including the City Hall, the History Museum, and Notre Dame Cathedral. One of the surprises of the country are the number of churches. Saigon also has one of the largest Chinatowns in the world. The district of Chalong is a hive of color, activity, and enterprise. Signs around the city still extol communist propaganda, but no one is really taking them seriously. Saigon is a boomtown of capitalist enterprise. Store shelves are stocked with every imaginable sort of product, from karaoke machines to cappuccino makers. Many of these goods were smuggled in from Thailand through Cambodia. Others were mailed from the Vietnamese living overseas. A small tip given to the postman at the time of delivery ensures overseas packages arrive without tampering. Ironically, the unofficial unit of currency is the US dollar. Out of necessity, the Vietnamese can fix and repair virtually anything, and one of their booming businesses is restoring items from garage sales sent to them by their relatives living overseas. In the hands of a Vietnamese repairman, a broken generator becomes an effective cigarette lighter. An empty Coke can be fashioned into a model helicopter. There is no such thing as garbage in Vietnam, where nothing is thrown away or wasted. With a little ingenuity, everything can be recycled and made into something useful. Expensive videotape players and TVs line the streets for miles on end. It seems a mystery that anyone could afford such luxuries in a country that until recently had been listed as one of the 10 poorest on earth. In many ways, the frantic pace of business and enterprise in Saigon is reminiscent of Singapore or Hong Kong as they emerged in the 1960s. This country is definitely on the path to prosperity and development, and one thing is absolutely certain: what is good for business is thumbs up for Vietnam. To the west of Saigon, near the Cambodian border, is the district of Tay Ninh, home of the fascinating Cao Dai religion. The Cao Dai religion is an indigenous Vietnamese religion which attempts to combine the best of Eastern and Western philosophy. There are 2 million followers of Cao Daism, and most of them come to prayer 4 times a day. They kneel before the all-seeing eye, painted on a globe in the front of the temple, and their Rococo chapel looks like something right out of Fantasia. The Cao Daists count among their holiest saints Jesus, Mohammed, and Buddha, but they also include Shakespeare, Winston Churchill, and Victor Hugo, just to name a few. Services are held daily at 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., and midnight at the Cao Dai Holy Temple. South of Saigon is the Mekong Delta, a pancake flat region of rivers and rice paddies, which is thought of as Vietnam's breadbasket. Enough rice is grown in this region alone to feed the entire country. The Mekong Delta provides an endless parade of colorful boats and activities. Although there are few tourist attractions in this region, it is always of interest to visit the Mekong Delta and simply study Vietnamese rural life as it floats by. Just one road runs the narrow length of Vietnam from Saigon to Hanoi. It is called appropriately Highway 1. Often less than 2 lanes wide, it runs for over 1,000 miles. It threads a narrow strip of land between the Central Highlands and the South China Sea, where 80% of Vietnam's population lives. One of the first stops along the road north out of Saigon is the old French colonial resort town of Dalat. When the southern plains became too hot and humid, the French used to come in droves to the Central Highlands and the hill station of Dalat to cool off. French traditions continue on in Dalat. One of the most delightful is the delicious French bread available in every restaurant and on every street corner in the country. Dalat doesn't really look or feel like the rest of Vietnam with its cool climate and plentiful pine trees. It is a vacation mecca for Vietnamese tourists who come here to sample a variety of fruits and vegetables that grow nowhere else in the country. On the coast north of Saigon is the lovely beach town of Nha Trang. The town of Nha Trang is known for its genteel pace, its fine seafood, and its aging French beach resorts. Vietnam possesses a geography which has always lent itself to invasion and occupation by hostile forces. The piratical Cham Empire of India arrived in the 2nd century. Their Hindu-inspired temples are still visible throughout central Vietnam. There have been unceasing invasions by China and sporadic uprisings against colonial invaders like France and Japan. The Vietnam War seems to the Vietnamese like just another in a long series of conflicts they have had to endure. They do not call it the Vietnam War here, they call it the American War. To them, it is not the biggest war in their history, but just another bump in an endlessly rutted road of conflict and suffering. Many people think of Vietnam as two separate and distinct countries. The South, symbolized by brash capitalist Saigon, and the North, symbolized by sedate, elegant Hanoi. Perhaps what has always been forgotten in this equation is rural Vietnam, where most of the population live. In this third Vietnam, rural farmers go to work in fields without the vaguest notion of the finer points of communism or capitalism. Most peasant farmers do recognize that agricultural reforms introduced in 1988 allow them to grow whatever they want and sell it to whomever they wish. Land ownership is still in a period of transition, with many farmers paying a 10% lease fee in goods to the government to farm their plot. Irrigating the fields is still done the traditional way, and the local boys will gladly demonstrate that there are at least 20 different ways to lounge on a water buffalo. It helps to wash your couch once in a while. This is the life of rural Vietnam, a region where no arable land is left uncultivated, no navigable river is unfished, where nothing is wasted and nothing discarded. Although central Vietnam was the site of much of the worst fighting in the war, seldom do the natives greet you with anything less than a smile. Any race of people less optimistic would surely have perished in this country long ago. During the many conflicts that have befallen them, the peasant farmers of rural Vietnam searched for alliances with whatever party could keep them alive and guarantee their safety. Most probably never understood the deeper meanings of a war between two conflicting ideologies that raged around them. In today's Vietnam, there is a saying that a tree will always grow on a rocky hill if you tend it carefully, giving it water, soil, and love. Now that resourcefulness, optimism, and attention to detail that has won so many wars can be called on to develop an economy and make a country grow. So quick has been the transition, so industrious is the current mood, that the visitor may question which political philosophy has triumphed in the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in the long run. By mastering every aspect of the nature that surrounded them, the Vietnamese knew that somehow they would survive and that better times lay ahead. Those better times have arrived, and Vietnam is now a country in bloom. North of Da Nang is the ancient imperial city of Hue. Situated on the perfumed river, Hue served as Vietnam's political capital from 1802 to 1945 under 13 emperors of the Nguyen dynasty. It is a city of quaint pagodas and shady tree-lined streets and boulevards. Hue is also a university town whose elite Mandarin schools once led Vietnam in medicine, literature, and music. Like the emperors of China, the Vietnamese emperors spent much of their lives building their own tombs. The 7 royal tombs of the emperors of Vietnam are much more than just monuments. They are royal resorts or meditation centers with landscaped parks and gardens, lakes, pavilions, and pagodas. In 1963, Hue became the center of protest by Buddhist monks when the highly Catholic South Vietnamese government took steps to suppress Buddhism. Many Buddhist monks set fire to themselves on the streets of Saigon in protest. The next morning, pictures of the protest would appear on the front pages of newspapers around the world. The resulting outcry signaled the downfall of President Diem's South Vietnamese government and the beginning of instability in the region. In the heart of Hue is the emperor's imperial city called the Citadel, a 6-square-mile walled region which was almost an exact replica of the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. Sadly, during the 1968 Tet Offensive, the magnificent Forbidden Purple City became a hiding place for the Viet Cong, who were rounding up and executing suspected Western sympathizers. The American General William Westmoreland gave orders to do what was necessary to recapture the city, and over the next week, the VC were driven from their hiding places and the imperial city was almost entirely destroyed by bombing. Today, almost nothing remains of the emperor's palace and residence. What took 20,000 men 150 years to build was reduced to rubble in just 10 days of bombing by American B-52s. One can only imagine what the great imperial city of Hue must have looked like just 2 short decades ago. North of Hue is the unofficial border between North and South Vietnam, called by its wartime name, the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. The Hien Long Bridge over the Bun Hai River may be one of the most bombed structures in the history of warfare. It marks the 17th parallel, once the official dividing line between North and South Vietnam. Even now, almost every bridge in Vietnam is marked by abandoned bunkers at either end, and scarcely a single bridge in the entire country survived the war unscathed. Prior to the lifting of sanctions against Vietnam, there was almost no public funding to restore the country's damaged infrastructure, and even today, many bridges are still rickety paste-up jobs or simply have never been replaced. The jungles surrounding the demilitarized zone were in fact the most militarized zones of the country, and countless North Vietnamese cemeteries are spread across the landscape. Along Highway 9, one can also find remnants of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was not a single trail, but a series of paths through the jungle by which the South Vietnamese Communist forces were supplied with arms from the north during the war. The regions around what were once U.S. military fire bases are now lunar landscapes of bomb craters, shrapnel, and buried live ordnance where almost no living thing will grow. Travel through these regions is restricted to well-marked footpaths as live mines and unexploded bombs litter the landscape. People living in the region have put on display some fairly interesting lawn ornaments they have unearthed while gardening. The locals regularly sweep the area with metal detectors looking for unexploded bombs to dig up and sell as scrap metal. Every year, literally hundreds of people lose arms, legs, or lives while digging for scrap or plowing their fields. Nevertheless, when they find a spot, they dig. You can see the bomb already unearthed behind this farmer. The U.S. dropped half a ton of bombs for every man, woman, and child in Vietnam, a country of 72 million people. But the people are literally turning those swords into plowshares, and today Vietnam is the largest exporter of scrap metal in the world. What isn't sold to the Japanese is pounded out and made into something useful. The north of Vietnam is marked by ancient rice lands of the Red River Delta. Before the French unified the country in the late 19th century, it was known as Tonkin. Its capital, Hanoi, will be our next destination. Most people find it comfortable to board the Reunification Express train to journey on to Hanoi. From the train, one can easily see the innumerable bomb craters along the railroad line, now turned into duck ponds by resourceful farmers. The train journey is a spectacular one and takes you through some of the most magnificent scenery Vietnam has to offer. Vietnam's climate varies considerably throughout the year, and the entire country is subject to devastating typhoons. Many cities have never upgraded their 19th century drainage systems, and flooding is often the rule. The North Vietnamese seem to take the periodic flooding of their towns in stride. Apparently, they have had much more to fear over the past 2 decades than a few drops of rain falling from the sky. The people of North Vietnam are today extremely eager to reconcile matters with their former enemies and move into a prosperous future. Admittedly, smiles come less easily to their faces than to the faces of their southern neighbors. This was not an indication of hostility, but a combination of grinding poverty and traditional reserve, more characteristic of the northern regions. If Hanoi was a more elegant, less Americanized place than anywhere else in the country, it was also more disciplined and communist at the same time. Few people were looking up to Lenin anymore. Even in Hanoi, people were shedding the dull green uniform and pith helmet of the Communist Party and going into business for themselves. The hottest selling items in the city were briefcases for the budding entrepreneur. Indeed, after several decades of imposed isolation, Hanoi was tuning in to the world. The capital had found itself at the center of an investment boom which was sweeping the country, and was now struggling to bring its infrastructure up to speed. If anything, there were even more consumer goods available on the streets of Hanoi than in Saigon, as no party official wanted to admit publicly that the capitalists of the South were enjoying a better life than they were. The Old City is a region of 36 different streets, each named for the specific craft once practiced there. This part of Hanoi has changed little in centuries. Hanoi is perhaps a more atmospheric city than Saigon, built around a series of parks and lakes, and it retains all of the charm of a bygone era. The Temple of Literature, Vietnam's first university, is also in a quiet park-like setting, as is the one-pillar pagoda. Both were built in the 11th century. All in all, Hanoi's numerous parks, gardens, and lakes give the city a peaceful, easygoing feeling that today is found almost nowhere else in Asia. The French fashioned a great deal of Hanoi's architecture, including the Opera House. Finally, in the north of Vietnam, there is one destination no one should miss: the remarkable islands of Ha Long Bay. Here on the Gulf of Tonkin are over 3,000 spectacular limestone islands and outcrops rising in a chain that runs for over 200 miles, as far north as Guilin in southern China. You may come to Vietnam today with many fears and reservations about what you will find here in the aftermath of 3 decades of war and diplomatic isolation. But it may come as a surprise to discover that half of the population of this vital and resourceful nation is too young to even remember the Vietnam War. Each time you look into their fresh, eager faces, you may be tempted to tell them about what the war has meant to the United States or to yourself as an individual. You may find polite interest from the young people, but little else. The ambitious young nation of Vietnam would like nothing more than to put these issues into the past and forge ahead into a prosperous future. Ironically, what American servicemen fought and died for in Vietnam, the values of free enterprise, have for the most part triumphed here. The Vietnamese are poised to inherit a country that has finally gotten up on its feet and shows all signs of developing into another of Asia's economic dragons. For both sides, it is a time for healing, a time to learn from the mistakes of the past so that they will never be repeated in the future. They are only at the starting line. It is finally their race to run, and theirs alone. The best we can do for them now is to wish them well.